realize that parking is a great problem. I just, for my mother's benefit, who got a ticket last time, Mom, if you just write on it guess, they will, then it's, but that's not just for you. No, kidding. The university does not like to create bad will in any way. If people are here just once and they get a parking ticket, if you just write that you're a guest on it and send it in, then they will not bother you with that. Well, this corridor, which is sort of nice. There's forms around for people who are doing this for religious education credit. They're in the back, and you can pick one of those up and hand them in. I think that's enough. Well, we're going to be doing a whole series on Christology, trying to look at the question of who Christ is, and our general theme is, who do you say that I am? That striking statement that Jesus directed to his disciples. And we'll be looking at that question from a number of different angles. It looks like we have 6 lectures here each Tuesday night, 7:30 to 9:30, and we're talking about the historical Jesus and looking at Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, Christ and salvation, Christ and the resurrection, and Christ and liberation. So various ways of trying to see who Jesus is and trying to answer that question for ourselves. Who do you say that I am? I think it's probably important to note right away that that's not just an objective kind of search like, well, let's see who this fellow who lived 2,000 years ago really is. Probably you can't get very far with that approach. It seems to be much more a matter of a passionate kind of search, like, hey, is there something here for me? Is there something that could help me with my life? Is there some way here that I could understand my existence better or become a better person? There needs to be a passion connected with the search. There has to be something existential about it, something about it involves our being, our person, some sort of quest that's at stake in all of that. It's really a search for the truth, search for how Jesus might be Savior for us and to guide and help us. Now, tonight I am going to use a particular methodology in this, in which, based on the premise that one way of trying to figure out the answer to the question, who do you say that I am, is to see how the story of Jesus sheds light on our own story. It is to see how our own personal story intersects with the story of Jesus, so that all that stuff that we hear about Jesus, what light would it shed on my own story or parts of my story or what's going on with me in my life? The methodologies, I think, is important to keep in mind in all of this, and it amounts to an invitation to sort of look at your own story in this same light, that is, letting the story of Jesus shine on it. Now, I'll stop periodically along here, I think, and give us a chance to reflect or due to our one-to-one discussion and so on. But I'm going to begin by telling something of my own story that relates to the question of discipleship. And some here might guess what parts of the story that might be. I will be talking about my own encounters with Karl Rahner, great Jesuit theologian who has just died recently on March 31st. Is gone to his reward at the age of 80. So Rahner is one of the world's great theologians. Many would say that he's the greatest theologian since the time of Aquinas in the 13th century. Some would think he's the best of this century. And so anyways, an extremely important figure, very influential on me. And I'm telling this story tonight with this in mind, I'm going to then see what the story of Jesus, what light it will shed on this whole story of discipleship. So you sort of have to bear with me for a while to see where we're going. We get to Jesus Christ along the way here. This is an attempt to look at the first story to see, let Christ's story shed light on it. Well, it was back, I think, somewhere around the summer of 1974 when I first met Karl Rahner. I had gone over to Germany, and I was staying with a family up in northern part of Germany in Osnabrück. And I really didn't know any German, and so I lived with them for 2 weeks trying to learn German. And at the end of that 2 weeks, I waited till everyone was out of the house and called up Karl Rahner, who was living down in Munich. I did that on purpose because I just wanted to try to talk to him myself. Well, I thought I knew what he was saying on the phone. He said 4 words that I understood, something about you could come and see me. I thought I had the right day, and so on. He said, "Nicht lange," not long, we can't talk long, and "kein English," no English will we speak. I think he had a little feeling on the phone that I wasn't doing all that well in German, but... So I got on a train on the appointed day and got down to Munich and to see Karl Rahner, great Jesuit theologian. And I was introduced to him and told him that I was seriously thinking about writing something about him. And he said to me, "Such things are as the sands of the seashore." Well, that didn't sound too good as a starting point, you know. It wasn't really encouraging. So he said, "Well, be in my office at a certain time." And he says, "Bring an interpreter with you." Well, I guess I hadn't been doing as well as I thought I was doing. So he says, "Bring an interpreter with you." So I got there. Well, I didn't want an interpreter because I'd come there to sort of get the measure of the man. I really wanted to meet him, interact with him, so I didn't want an interpreter in the worst way. So I told the interpreter to get lost. And so I went into Rahner's room, and he says, in German, "Where's the interpreter?" And I said, "Well, let's just try to talk, you know." And he says, "Where's the interpreter?" "Get the interpreter." And I said, "Well, I think he's in the bathroom right now. Really can't come here." So he says, "Oh, sit down." So I sat down and we began to talk. And it's funny, but right in the beginning, I knew that we would get along. He very much reminded me of certain elements of my own father. And I could see right through all that gruffness and so on. And I knew underneath that there was a good heart. I just intuitively knew that. So there we sat down and we're talking, and as he's going along, he's getting mellower and warmer and nicer, and he even tells me some intimate things about himself the very first time I met him. Also took out a stack of notes about, I don't know how high, a big stack of notes, and was telling me about him. And I said, "Well, are those notes that your students compiled?" He says, "No, my students, I did those notes, you know. That's going to be my great book that he was hoping to come out with." Well, I was at that point looking at the book that later became the Foundations of Christian Faith, Karl Rahner's great work. Well, after about 40 minutes, I remember telling Rahner, "Nicht lange, Pater," not long, and he says, "No, you stay, and we'll talk." So it was the most delightful experience, and after about an hour and 20 minutes, he stood up and put his arm around me and said, "Pray for my happy death." It was a very sort of touching experience. I went out and wrote down a lot of notes and so on, talked to a lot of people who knew him there, talked to some of his students. They told me Rahner never drove a car. The students said that he would get them to take him out in the car, and he always wanted to go fast. If they got behind a truck, he couldn't stand it, you know. Get around them, hurry up. So he was just dynamo. Everything about him was energetic. One time I asked him, I said, how'd you write so many things? In his room is all lined with books. But the odd thing about it was they were all his own books. Second editions, translations in all different languages and so on. What Ronner has written in translation, second edition, everything, articles and books, numbers over 4,000. Just to list them takes a book, what he has written. So, they're an impatient kind of man, violent man, chain smoker. Remember one time being in his room, and he jumps up on the back of his furniture trying to get some books off the shelf. I'm walking around behind him like this, saying he's not going to fall and break his neck while I'm in here. Proved an interesting man. I remember one time I'm putting together a couple different experiences because after that one time I left Munich and so on. I went back later on. I lived there for a couple months, ate meals with him. He lived in a big house of Jesuits, about 70 priests in there and so on. And we'd have, after the main meal, we'd go up for coffee and desserts. And one time Ron had given me one of his books to read, and I had taken it back to him at the time of going to the coffee drinking thing, and Ron had taken it, and as soon as I handed it to him, I noticed he went very quickly like that. And somebody came up to him and, wanted to see what book that was. Well, when they saw it was one of his own books, or he had to show him, he was just genuinely embarrassed about that. I noticed in all the time, a couple months I was there, this brilliant man was really never the center of theological conversation. I mean, there was never a time when, he dominated the scene. He would mostly sit back and watch other people talk and listen to them and so on. Conversation with Ronner, it was never possible to say much, because as soon as you said about 8 words, he knew what you were thinking already, and then would have some sort of response to make to that. He loved to associate with down-to-earth people. Remember, he didn't like any frills or a stuffed shirt type. Very much against that. I remember one time I went out for a walk, and we stopped in a store there, at a storefront where they were like a soup kitchen-like thing. And we went in there. Well, Ronner wanted to know, where do you cook the food, and how do you make it, and how do you get it out here, and so on. He was always interested in the details of life like that. Said one time when you go to new cities, he often referred to go to the department stores instead of the churches. He was interested in details of everyday life. One time, my great thrill was I was there on Holy Thursday with him, and he preached at the Mass. Got up, he was preaching for 20 people who lived in his own house. Gets up, the time I was there, wondered what he would do, how he would handle this. Gets up, takes out of his pocket about 3 typed pages, read it, beautiful, simple sermon, easily understood by even the young students there and so on. But he'd gone to all that trouble to print out this sermon for 20 people. An amazing kind of thing, really. Well, the last time that I saw Ronner was after I had finished writing a book about him and went to see him, and he was kind enough to write the introduction to it for me. Great thrill for me, of course. And during that time, we had some interesting conversation. I saw his great file. I watched him while he wrote this. He dictated it to some fellow he brought in, and he was standing with his big scissors in his hand, just pacing the floor and scratching his back and picking things up off the floor. He was dynamo, and he'd come up behind these people, and this guy typing, and said, "That's not right, say that." So just tremendous energy. And then at one point, I finally talked him into calming down a bit, and he laid down his couch, and he just sort of just rolled out of him then. It was a beautiful thing to see. So when I left Ronner for the last time, I wrote him a note, and I said, recalled something that he had told me one time. There was, he said, always be critical of my thought, and don't become a disciple. said, don't become a disciple of mine. So I wrote him a note. I said, keeping in mind that advice, don't become a disciple. And at the same time, I said, I want to thank you for allowing me to remain a Christian with intellectual honesty, showing me how to see how Christianity fits in with life, and to do so without putting my brains on hold, while intellectually being able to deal with that. And for showing me a way to sort of integrate my life, to pull all the aspects of my life, my pastoral work, personal life, and so on together into a focus. I wrote him a note thanking him for that. Well, when I heard of his death last week, it's been a shock. I wrote an article for NCR, and that also will appear in the Catholic Chronicle, the next issue, I think. And I said in there that I feel a great sense of loss for his death. And that I do. But I said it's not a personal loss, not in that sense, because I really can't count him a friend. There's many people in the United States who know him as a friend. I can't really say that, despite the fact he spent a lot of time talking to me and so on. Perhaps I could call him my mentor, my guide, my teacher. But I said the sense of loss that I have is a cosmic sense, that the world has lost something. The human race is impoverished. This man who has been so influential in the Second Vatican Council shapes the thinking of Catholics. Everybody in this room is influenced by Karl Rahner. His thought has come down to so many people. So I said the loss is cosmic. It's bigger than a personal loss. It's a major event here. Someone wrote an article in the New York Times calling Rahner the quiet mover of the Catholic Church, saying that he was more influential than than the popes are. Quiet mover, the one who's changed so many things. Got a letter. A number of people have written me about Rahner. I got a letter from a former student of mine, very nice, and saying, I realize that this is probably a hard time for you and so on. But I want you to know that I feel that loss also, because I think through you, Karl Rahner has touched my life, me and my wife, and helped us to make a better life for ourselves. Beautiful kind of note that I received. Well, that's my story. My story of interaction with Karl Rahner. I'd like people to keep that story in mind as we move on to see what light the story of Jesus of Nazareth can shed on all of this. We're going to see if that helps me understand something of that story, or for other people to think of something similar. You see, when you start to stop and think about the story I've told, I think there's a number of things that are revealed. That is that in the presence of some people, we feel better. There's some people who sort of brighten life for us, or help us to see something better, who help us to know our better selves, who pull us out in some way. Well, that's what Karl Rahner did for me. Karl Rahner, is one who I was so, when I was in his presence, I was in the presence of greatness. Greatness. A man who makes a difference in the whole world, who changes things. But that's the truth of the matter, isn't it? That there are some people who function that way for us. It'd be interesting for everyone to think of somebody like that, who makes life look a little better because you're in their presence, because they touch you in some way. Begins to get at something of this question of discipleship. I think that many of us would say we feel a need for a mentor, for a teacher. In a way, I think we're looking for a guru, for a wise person, for somebody who knows something about life and can help us to see it. Isn't that true? Don't we sometimes feel that need for a wise person who could guide us, help us, someone we could follow? One of our problems that seems in the culture is a lack of heroes, a lack of people we look up to. You know, one of the reasons I think the young people as they're going along don't find that very often in the next generation, previous generation, because it changes so much. Because they're sitting there saying, well, what could she know about this? Because her world is so different from mine. It sets up a real problem for each succeeding generation in a fast-paced world where everything is moving along like that. Where are the heroes? Where are the wise people? Who do you go to if you're looking for advice, for counsel, for spiritual kind of direction? Another thing that I would note about it, one of my things I said to Ron is, thank you for allowing me, teaching me how I can remain a Christian and to do so with intellectual honesty. One of the problems with our own time when we're contemplating this discipleship question is that very often we are a minority. It's hard to find at times people who share our values, or we're working in a world where the values seem so different from any talk of Christian discipleship, where it's almost a struggle in a way to stay within that circle of faith that we hold dear. So discipleship doesn't come easily in our world because we are very often sort of this minority kind of grouping. Where are the people with whom we can share, talk deeply, feel that we're at one? And where are the tugs and pulls bringing us away from our value system? Another thing about discipleship I would note is, and that is the notion of personal encounter. I wanted to talk to Ronner directly. I didn't want the interpreter there. I was there to get the measure of the man. You know, I'd read his writings. I want to know who he was. It's in the sense of personal encounter that I would see him as mentor, or that I could trust much of what he had to say, or get behind the words in his book. So helpful to me to know the man in the limited way that I do in order to understand what he has said. Those who are attentive and alert to my story so far can tell that there's a certain ambivalence about this question of discipleship. I wrote in the preface to my book, I think, something about, in dealing with Karl Rahner, one of the things that was clear to me that one should not be his disciple. One shouldn't slavishly follow him. One should try to do what he did. That is, to think creatively about one's own situation. You know, using the Christian framework, using the Scriptures, but think creatively in one's situation. It's very clear to me that one should not be a disciple in that slavish kind of sense. But on the other hand, there's no denying the influence. Well, the master-disciple relationship is one of teacher and learner, of leader and follower. So while I try to distance myself in a way, at the same time there's a way in which probably secretly I would say, I know what discipleship means in terms of my relationship with this particular great theologian. That's an interesting thing to reflect on. How one relates to the wise people in one's life, one's teachers, mentors, guides, gurus, or whatever. And the final thing that I would point out is that this question of discipleship seems to involve more people. In other words, somebody says, "Well, I've learned from this person," but then there's a passing on to somebody else. So I often think of my life work in that way. I've been privileged to know Rahner, to learn something of his, to be studying under the world's great theologians, many of them. It becomes a matter then of passing that on. And one becomes like a conduit in a way. for others, so that the ideas of these great people then get into the minds of some other people, because lesser lights are sharing that or popularizing it in some way. Well, that sort of thing happens all the way down the line. Parents think of what they learn from their own parents and how they pass it on to their children, how they become the teacher and leader for their children as they're going along. So one could see that same process at work, I think, in one's own life. Well, those are some of the elements I say as I look at that story, of my own story. There's things about discipleship that jump out at one. It involves a personal encounter with somebody else. It involves being with someone who touches and inspires us. Very often that gives us strength in the midst of a lot of the struggles of life, and then we're called upon somehow, it seems, to share whatever good things come our way through our mentors, through our teachers in life. Well, I'm going to stop there and invite people to do some one-to-one discussion at this point. And I'd like you just, some people might want to be very personal about it and say, well, here's a guru in my life. Others might want to talk about it more objectively about, well, what about discipleship and how does that fit into understanding myself? So I'm going to invite you to talk about the first part of my presentation here for a couple minutes with the person next to you. We'll do that right now. Operation and to look at the story of Jesus. I'm trying to try some experiment here a little bit. If we don't make it, we'll recoup in some other way. I'll think of an alternative in this screen, maybe. But what I want to do is look at the person who is really representative disciple in the Scriptures. One who's put forward in the Scriptures as being the model for the life of discipleship. And that person is Simon Peter. I want to try to look at this from the way Simon Peter might see it. Try to see how the story of Jesus looks to Simon Peter. So if I can't pull this off, I'll just call time out and present this more objectively. But we'll give it a try anyway. So, I really remember the time that we went down to Jerusalem. It was one of the big feasts. We got into the temple area, and then we went up northeast of the temple up there to that pool of Bethsaida, the one that's got the 5 porticos around it. Well, up at that pool, it's sort of a spring in there, and that spring water would bubble up every now and then, and when that happened, the first person who'd get into the pool would get cured. Well, it was quite remarkable. Well, I got there with the master, and we were looking around, and he spotted someone. That's the way he usually did. He usually looked for the person who was down and out, So he spotted him there, and he went over and talked to him. Typical. He likes to talk with these people. He says, well, the guy said, I've been here 38 years. Guy couldn't walk. He was very sick. He's been there 38 years waiting to get to be the first one into the pool. And he said, can't get in there. I don't have anybody to help me get into the pool. Well, you can imagine what the master did in a situation like that. Where he just looked at him and said, stand up and pick up your mat and walk. And he did it. So he stood up. Right there, 38 years he's been lying there. Picks up his mat, starts walking around. Well, ran into a group of the Pharisees. This was a Sabbath, Seemed like the master was always working miracles on the Sabbath. I don't know. Had a special thing about the Sabbath, I guess. But these Pharisees saw him, and they said, well, what are you walking around with your sleeping mat on the Sabbath for? Oh, that is one of the rules, right in the rabbinic writings. They had a right to say they're not allowed to walk on the Sabbath with your sleeping mat. So they said to him, well, who did this? He says, I really don't know. He didn't even know who, he didn't pay attention in the conversation to find out who the master was, but he He says, I don't know. Well, the Pharisees said, they found, later on a guy runs into the master over at the temple, and he told him, who he was and so on. Well, the Pharisees were all upset. They really wanted to persecute the master at that point. And when the master heard that, he confronted him directly. He often did that. And he said to them, my Father is at work until now, and I'm at work also. Well, you should have seen what that did. That really set them off. They're over there grumbling. Oh, he's making himself like God, this guy. Well, they were really angry about it. Oh, and then it was at that time that they really decided, well, now they're going to have to try to rub him out. Well, and Jesus then took them on again. Well, they became more determined. Jesus told them this time, look, the Son can't do anything by himself, but only what he sees the Father doing. Everything the Father does, he shows the Son. Well, you can imagine with this sort of identification with the Father that Jesus said there, that really upset him. But I've been thinking about that. That's really interesting what he said. You know what I thought of when I heard him say that? I thought of him as a young man. I'm trying to get into his head, I thought of him as a young man growing up with his father Joseph and watching him at the carpenter shop, watching him and finding out what he does. Joseph, everything he knew, he would tell him. It's the way, in our culture that people learn to trade. They got a master. They would just observe, be part of it. The master, it's amazing that way. He could take little events from his own life, like his relationship with his father and Joseph, and apply it then to his relationship with Abba, one that he called, in familiar terms, his heavenly Father. As I reflect on this, it reminds me of what a disciple really is. Because the Master himself was a disciple. Yeah, he's my Master, but really he showed me what it means to be a disciple by doing it himself. Yeah, he knew what the Heavenly Father did, learned from the Heavenly Father, and then went about telling the rest of us how it was, telling us about the kingdom. Remarkable man, the Master. He not only told us to do things, but he did them himself. Didn't just preach sermons, He acted them out. He lived out what he used to tell us. Goes off that particular story there from the 5th chapter of John's Gospel. Maybe somewhat how it might have looked to Peter as he observed this scene. And what is it that we end up learning here about Christ and discipleship? Well, Peter was on the mark. He had it pretty well figured. The first and prime disciple in the Christian religion is really Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the revelation of the Father. He who sees me sees the Father, he says. There's a bold assertion. Well, he's like the wisdom of the Father. He's like with God from the beginning, and he knew the secrets of the Father. He knew what he was all about, what he had to say. And then Jesus lived that out. Told us about it, but mostly gave it to us through example. So he himself was the model of what a disciple is supposed to be. A disciple is a learner and a follower. Jesus presents himself as one who learned the secrets of the Father and gave them to the rest of us. Jesus presents himself as one who is totally obedient to the will of his Father, even to the point of death. He had only that to do, to be obedient to what Abba told him to do. That's how he lived his whole life, in tune with the mystery that surrounds all of us. Following out the will of that mystery. Yeah, the first thing I want to say analytically about discipleship is, and Christology, understanding Christ, is that he's the disciple, the prime one. And all the rest of discipleship is derived from him. He's got the energy that allows us to be disciples. He's got the wisdom that shows us how to be disciples. Peter was on the mark when he said he learned from that particular experience what discipleship is all about. Well, shall we try and cover one? Why not? Always answer with another question. Why not? Well, I'll tell it. Well, this talk of discipleship takes me back, really, to the very first time that I met the Master. We've been out fishing on the Lake of Gennesareth all night. Oh, it's been a terrible night. Oh, we hadn't caught anything all night. That seldom happens to me. Believe me, I'm a good fisherman. You know, I know. If anyone knows this lake, I know it. We're out there all night and no fish. So we come in with our buddies, James and John, and we're cleaning the nets up here. And this traveling preacher comes up. Well, you know there's a lot of those around, these traveling preachers. Well, he comes up and he just sort of says, well, let's go out in the boat. Well, I mean, nobody pushes me around like that and tells me what to do, but for some silly, odd reason, I said, well, okay. So we got in the boat, we went off a few feet from the shore, and from there he addressed the crowd, talked to them about the kingdom. I never heard anyone preach like that. It was fascinating. Well, after he finished, you know, I thought it'd be nice to have a little further conversation, but you know what he says? He says, let's go out and catch some fish. Well, now I know the guy doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no fish to be caught now. Didn't catch him all night. We're not going to catch him. I told him he's crazy, you know, we're not going to. But he had this insistent voice. It's like he knew something. It was a funny feeling. It was like he spoke with such authority. He said, no, go out there and into the lake. Well, you wouldn't believe it. You know, you just really wouldn't believe it. Cast the net the first time. The net is so full, we can hardly lift it up. Well, you hardly get the net, the fish, into the boat. And yet, nets didn't break. That was sort of surprising. What I did right there, I just spontaneously, without any thinking, I don't know why I did it, I just fell right down on my knees. And I said, get away from me. Get away from me. I'm a sinful person. Oh, it was something else, you know. You know what he said to me then? He said, don't be afraid. I was afraid. He knew it right away. Fearsome business being in the presence of this God. I was genuinely terror-struck. He said to me, don't be afraid. And he says, from now on, you are to catch people. I wasn't sure exactly what he meant by that. But you know what I did? Went, took the boats into shore, packed it all up, left the business, left everything, and I've been following them ever since. Well, we try to analyze that story here of Peter's perception of his own first call to discipleship. Well, the first thing that we would notice about discipleship, I think, from this vantage point, is that it is a call. It comes from sort of Well, where it comes from, doesn't come from ourselves, does it? You might not know where it comes from, but the one thing that's clear is it doesn't come from ourselves. I mean, we could try to think about that. It's something bigger than me that's sort of putting in my head that I ought to live a certain way. Or it's like inside of myself there's a drive that's bigger than I am propelling me to do something in life, to live a certain way or to act a certain way. Yeah, if discipleship involves a call, maybe we could, so some people would say, well, it's a call from God. Well, other people would say, well, it's a call, I don't know where it's from, who it's from, but it's imperious, it pushes, it's tugging at me to act in a particular way. And the call needs a free response. The call to discipleship needs a free response. I mean, it isn't like I'm forced to do it. I got a choice. No, I didn't have to, Peter says, I didn't have to leave the boat. But there's a choice involved. You feel as though, well, I'm making a decision about this. I'm making a decision about the direction of my life or what I want to do or who I want to be. It's something that seems to go along with adulthood. You can't do it when you're 6 or 12 in a way. Well, maybe you can to a degree. That's maybe going too far. But it seems more clearly to link up with something you do when you're an adult, when you've been thinking and looking at life and dealing with the problems of life. Decide, I'm going to act in a particular way. I'm going to do something particular with my existence. So it's a call to respond freely in an adult kind of fashion. And in the Christian terms, this discipleship is an answer to the call of Jesus Christ to speak with absolute authority. Oh, he doesn't say, Peter. Well, I remember another time it was like my call. We were walking along, and there was this guy here, and we got up to him, and the master said to him, come follow me. And the guy was grieving. He says, well, master, let me bury my father first. A couple days for the funeral. You know what the master said? He said, let the dead bury the dead now. Let the dead bury the dead. Follow me now, he said. Interesting, isn't it? Jesus speaks with authority, and there's a demand about it. It demands, the call is to a total commitment, not half and half part, but a total commitment to follow him, to be dedicated to him. It calls for a decision about life. Well, some things that we might get out of that story about discipleship. We respond to a demanding kind of call with asking for total commitment in life. I suppose we ought to add there, we'll see it clear enough. We'll see it clear enough. We're back to our friend again. Remember the time when Jesus fed all those people? Blew my mind. We had a few loaves of bread and fish. We had, you know how many people we had there? At least 5,000. And the master fed them. Amazing thing. Well, right after that, I don't know why he did this. He told us to go across the lake. He was going to stay and pray for a while. He was like that, you know. After big events, a lot of people, he'd go off and pray. Spend a lot of time in prayer at night. But he told us to just go away, So we started out, we're starting to cross the lake. We got out about a couple hundred yards, and this storm came up. Quite amazing. It was 3 a.m., by the time we got out there. Big storm, a couple hundred yards off. Well, I mean, we were scared. And you're not going to believe this, but while we're out there rowing this boat, we look out, and here's this figure. You're ready for this. He's walking across the water, coming right at us. Well, you might have guessed by the way I talk, I am a little impetuous. I'm a little impetuous at times. I tend to get carried away. Well, I looked out there, and I said to this ghost, scared as I was, I said, "Master, if it's you out there, just tell me to come across the water and I'll come there to meet you." Well, it was him. He said, "Come." So I jumped right out of this boat. Not going to believe this either. But I walked right on the water towards him. I'm going along. And suddenly I said to myself, what am I doing? What am I doing out here? Well, I guess you'd say I lost confidence in the whole project. Lost confidence, and what happened? I started going right down. Well, fortunately, the master was always there to pick me up. Well, right when I'm going down all these waves, he grabs me and gets me back into the boat and said to me something I'll never forget. He says, "How little faith you have." Never forget it. How little faith, the master said to me, how little faith you got. Didn't have enough faith to just walk over and see me. Well, there's some obvious things to say about discipleship out of all of this, don't we? Discipleship involves faith. Faith which is not an intellectual assent to truths, but faith which is a commitment to a person. Dedication to Jesus of Nazareth. A deep down belief that you can do anything with his power. Know that he's there always with a hand for us. He's there calling us to do crazy things at times, wild things, things we don't even think we can do, things that we think are beyond our potential. But the funny thing is that when we answer it, we find out our potential is greater than we ever thought. Now, that's the dedicated faith in Christ seems to show that we only tap about 20% of what we got, and there's a lot more to be tapped, and he's calling upon us to do it. The discipleship involves faith, but it's a faith that's really subject to doubt. Well, there isn't just pure, perfect faith. Hans Kohn always likes to say, that line between belief and unbelief isn't between us and those people out there. That line runs right here to our own heart. All of it. Mixture of belief and unbelief. See, that's the interesting thing about Peter as he's put forth in the Gospel. Here's the leader of the church, the rock. As we go along here, he shows that he was a mighty fallible, weak, unbelieving person very often. And the Gospels don't hold back on that. They give us the picture nice and clear. And I think for a reason. You know why I think that the Gospel writers did that? For our benefit of their audience. So that no one would be walking around thinking that they had to be perfect, or that you couldn't be picked up after you would fall. I think that's why Peter is put in this light by the evangelists, especially Matthew. He's the representative disciple both in his belief, his commitment, but also in his unbelief, in the fact that he wavers, that doubt is part of his life. It comes across to us as an interesting message about ourselves, not to get down on ourselves when we blow, not to think we've got to be perfect disciples all at once. Begin to see the struggle in the human heart between belief and unbelief. And the second thing that I would say about discipleship that comes out of all of this and Christology and understanding of Christ is that Jesus Christ is the only one, as representative of the Father, who is worthy of total commitment. You see, what Karl Rahner didn't want me to do was to make out of him an idol. Rahner has not created a group of disciples precisely because he probably told everyone else or his students the same thing. So he's always wanted people to think for themselves, to be independent. Karl Rahner knew that he was not God. It was a healthy thing to know, even for a great man. Some great people in history have forgotten that. Oh, but Rahner never forgot it. Rahner hid the book when I gave it back to him. Well, Rahner knew that he was a conduit. It's a reminder to us there's only one that's worthy of total commitment. There's only one who will never disappoint us. There's only one that we can bank on always and everywhere, in every situation. Only one. That's the great God as manifested to us concretely through the absolute Savior, Jesus Christ. Interesting. That whole business of hero worship I was analyzing, where is there a hero that won't let us down? That really is Jesus Christ. Who is around that has total wisdom? That is Jesus Christ. Who is there that we can trust as a guru for our lives? That is the Lord himself. He alone is worthy of this kind of total faith. Decision time here. I got a lot of these stories. Peter's got an interesting person. I think that it probably makes most sense at this point to take a break. And let's take a 5-minute break and then return. We end at 9:30. What? Okay. Getting on here. The topic this evening is discipleship. We're trying to understand more who Christ is and what discipleship is all about. We're doing this by seeing how the stories in the Scriptures intersect with our own personal stories and how they illumine those. Help us to know better who we are and where we fit and what we are all about. Lest I forget, I brought some of the posters or flyers for this class and they're in the back, and anyone who wants to take one and give it to a friend or put it up someplace and let people know about the rest of the series, I would appreciate that. We have a limited number of those in the back, but anyone who can use it that way, I would appreciate you handing it on to others. Okay, shall we give this another try here? Well, we walked around a lot, I mean, the master was a great walker. Never had any place to lay his head, he said. Oh, we were walking up and down Galilee all the time, and gathering little crowds. A lot of times the crowds were disappointing, But maybe they started dropping off there for a while. Worried us, worried the master too, I think. At least that's how I picked it up from him. Yeah, well, it wasn't really going all that well. Well, one day we went to Caesarea Philippi. When we got there, and the master did something a little different. He posed a question to us directly. Said, what's the scuttlebutt? Well, what do you mean, what's the scuttlebutt? Well, what are they saying? About what? About me. Oh, what's the word around? What are people saying about who I am? Well, we've been hearing a lot of stuff. So he said, well, to tell you the truth, some people think you're John the Baptist, come back from the dead. Other people think you're Jeremiah, this prophet who talks about the covenant come back. Some think you're Elijah. And then he looked at us all, but he took a special look at me. And he said then, yeah, okay, but who do you say that I am? Well, we had a bit of silence there. I guess about every time we're in a spot like that, it always seemed like it was my job to speak up. Those other 11 guys, I don't know what they were doing. And it always seemed it was my turn. I always had this call. Well, and second thought, maybe I never really gave him a chance. It was more like I seemed to jump in there pretty quickly. But I got it in. To tell you the truth, I don't know where it came from. I don't even know why I said it. It just came tumbling out. Just came right out of my mouth. I said, looked him right in the eye and said, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Last thing in my mind before that, I don't know, it just came out from nowhere. It's like it wasn't my own thought. And he told me then, afterwards, looked at me, and pretty serious moment, he said, you're going to be the rock. You're going to be the foundation of this community. Not only that, but I'm going to give to you the keys to the kingdom. Well, you can imagine the keys to the kingdom, keys to the whole kingdom, power over the whole thing. Well, it was quite a moment, I must say. Master reminded me at one point that it really wasn't me who thought of that. It was Abba who put those words in my mouth. I was right. When I said I didn't know where it came from, the Master told me where it came from. It came from Abba. Abba speaking through me. Heavy burden that I had to carry, sort of a burden of leadership. Burden of being a disciple to this one who is Messiah and Son of God. Well, turn to analysis. What is that going to tell us about this whole business of discipleship? Well, to be a disciple means that we believe that Jesus of Nazareth, a most unlikely candidate, really has the key to all of human existence. That he knows more of what the divine human relationship is all about than anyone else who ever lived. That he's got greater insight into the deepest human questions than any other human being. That he is the Messiah, the one who had been awaited all the centuries. That he was the embodiment, carried within himself the hopes of Israel. the embodiment of all the hopes of Israel. That he was the final prophet. No, he wasn't Jeremiah. Wasn't even Isaiah come back, or Elijah, or John the Baptist. He was greater than all of those. Those guys were all neat prophets, but they were provisional prophets. Jesus of Nazareth is the absolute and final prophet. The one with the final word about what life is all about. The one who will never be reversed or overturned or overcome or surpassed in any way. To be a disciple means that we think that Jesus Christ is the absolute Savior. He's not just a neat ethical teacher, and not even just a prophet with the word from Abba, but he's the Savior in the sense that he's changed the world. That in a more poetic way, he's planted the seeds of the final victory. That he's changed the order of reality, that nothing's the same because he lives. All of human existence has been transformed, shaped anew. That's something of what it means to say that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, the final prophet. We could say it like this. When one looks at the face of Jesus, even as reflected in the disciples and in the Scriptures, one knows something of what the face of God is all about. Jesus Christ is like a parable of the Father. His life and his actions reveal to us the deepest secrets of Abba, the one who he could address in those familiar terms. So what does it mean to be a disciple? A Christian disciple means that Jesus is the key to all of it. Unlikely as it is that some carpenter from a little town in Galilee lived 2,000 years ago and never wrote a book or anything or did much is really the key to the whole of human existence. But discipleship means that one sees him in that way and tries in one way or another to follow it out. A few more stories there. We were traveling again, got to one of our favorite cities. We used to go here a lot. Capernaum. Nice little city. Well, as soon as we got there, those collectors of the temple tax, the Jews, they came up and said, does your master pay the half shekel or not? Well, that got me hot. Well, does the master pay the half shekel or not? Every good Jew pays the half shekel. We all pay our taxes. The master's a good Jew. I don't know why this guy insinuated that he doesn't. But then we got a sign, went in, I told him, well, you can be sure that the master pays the half shekel. And I told him that right straightforward. Well, we went inside the house then. I could tell the master wanted to talk to me. I knew those times there was something that he wanted to teach me. Some lesson here that I wasn't getting. So I better be on my toes now. And he said to me, odd thing, he says, well, when there's a king around, does he take the tax from sons, citizens, or from the foreigners? Well, it's obvious the king takes it from the foreigners, doesn't he? I didn't know what he was getting at. Couldn't figure that out. He came back and he said, well then, if that's the case, then the sons are exempt. Main thing for him to say. You know what I think he meant? I think he was trying to tell me that, well, we were really free not to pay that tax. Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? We're the sons. King doesn't demand from the sons. Therefore, it must be, the master is trying to tell me that the sons, we, us, are free from paying the tax, the temple tax. And then he went on to say something else that was strange. He said, but for the sake of those people, we'll pay it. Well, that was nice for him to say, but we were a little short at the moment. I think you're going to pay it anyway, but we're a little short. I always wondered about that guy who took care of the first. I always wondered why we were short all the time. I had my real doubts about that. Always short of money. Should have had more. But anyway, the master, I guess he knew we were in trouble. Since he told us, this is odd. He said, why don't you go fishing? Well, it's all right, you know. I mean, we said we had no money to pay the temple tax. He says, go fishing. So, I don't know why this was, but I did go in and cast the line and got one right away. Pull him in, get the fish, and there in his mouth, believe it or not, is a half shekel piece. Which then I, of course, being very smart and with it, got the coin quickly and went and paid the temple tax with the half shekel. That's an odd story, isn't it? An odd story. What are we going to find out about discipleship, about all of that? Well, there is something about freedom in that. I mean, I think we get the point. I mean, the master said we're free of that law. We're not going to pay that because of peer pressure. We're not going to pay that tax just because it's expected of us. We're free in relationship to that, but we're going to pay it because we think that's the thing to do in this situation. And it does give us a sense of solidarity with the Jewish community, supports the temple, the centerpiece of our religion, and so on. So that does seem like a good lesson to learn for the disciple. The disciple is not one just bound by a law, not one who's just following out rules and regulations, but the disciple is free. Well, free to respond to the situation, free to respond to the call. I think that's a legitimate thing to get out of that about discipleship. Well, maybe there's something else too, and that is that perhaps odd situations can become the precise way that the Master teaches us. Ordinary, strange situations or uncanny situations, things that don't seem to have much promise in terms of learning anything, turn out to be for the Master a teachable moment. He's got neat ways of finding teachable moments. When the Master comes across, there's a silly thing about paying a tax. He comes on with this riddle for me. Forces me to think a little bit. Go fishing. Well, if I hadn't gone fishing, I probably wouldn't have got the point of all this, Peter. So, what does that suggest to us about discipleship? That absolutely everything can mediate to us the call of the Master. Human relationships, people, failures, paying taxes, death, anything about human existence can mediate the call, can be the catalyst. In other words, the call doesn't come so much directly from the Master, not words whispered in the ear, but the Master calls through life situations, through what's going on around us, and some that we would never expect. And so it seems as though what the disciples got to do is be on alert, like Peter was, and be ready to respond to the call however it may come. Fine, I've saved some time here for questions. I got to do these, just two more here. I think we can do it. Back in the Jimmy Stewart role. I always felt pretty safe up in Galilee. No, it was pretty good up there. No one bothered us much. The master went around preaching. It was fine. Crowds diminished. I think I told you that before. Bears repeating, though. Mission wasn't going all that well up in Galilee. Master kept waiting for it to take off, catch fire. He's a terrific preacher, charismatic person, but you know, a lot of people just couldn't take it. A lot of people would listen and just walk away. Some people wouldn't understand his little stories. Almost seemed like they didn't want to. When other people did understand him, and they took off too. So it wasn't going well. And one day came the shockaroo. One day he said to us, he was out of a clear blue. He hadn't talked like this before. One day he said, I have to go to Jerusalem. I got to go to Jerusalem. And when I go there, they're going to get me. And they're going to kill me. That's what's going to happen. But I got to go anyway. Well, I'll tell you, it broke me up. I tell you, I wasn't just going to sit around for that. I waited till the other guys got lost. I got the master aside, took him aside, and I told him, "We can't go to Jerusalem. No, we just can't go there. You go down there, and the establishment people are going to get you. And if the Jewish leaders don't get you, the Roman authorities will. Let's stop this talk of going to Jerusalem." Well, I'll tell you, I never saw him get so hot. Never saw him get so mad. You know what he said to me? He said, "You're a scandal. You're going to try to cause me to stumble," he said. You're going to try to keep me from doing what I'm supposed to do. Well, then what he said to me, this I'll never forget this, he said, "Get behind me." And then he called me a devil. He said, "You get behind me, Satan. We won't hear any more talk of this. We're going to Jerusalem. That's it." And then after that, got a little crowd together, and he started talking to them. It's interesting. I don't remember it all, but he said something like, "If you want to gain your life, you got to lose it." You know, I felt like he was talking to me when he was talking to the crowd. You know, I think he was trying to tell me in a gentle way now, not this "get behind me, Satan." I think he was trying to tell me what he meant, what was behind it. You got to lose your life to gain it. Well, I think we had an obvious lesson to be learned here. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, remember him, the great Lutheran theologian, died in the death camp under Hitler after denouncing Hitler. Before that, he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. Cost of Discipleship, a great title. Suggesting, he talks in that book, he says, there is no cheap grace. There is no easy salvation. And I think that's the message here. You know, the discipleship hurts at times. Remember my original analysis of saying to Ronner, about intellectual honesty and a world that fights against our values and so on? That just creates the rub often, isn't it? The world doesn't believe in going the route of Jesus. The prevailing wisdom is that that's a dumb way to live, that it doesn't make sense. People think you're nutty if you try to be good. Think you're stupid and foolish if you give to those who use you. The world thinks it's crazy to forgive enemies. to try to be good to those who persecute you. Everybody thinks that's nutty, or most people in the world, and yet the discipleship of Christ calls upon us to do that. It's costly. It hurts. The Lord said it in another way. He says, well, you have to take up your cross and follow me. Cost of discipleship involves cross. Final story. Well, this is the hardest one to tell of all. Embarrasses me to have to say it. But everyone knows it now anyway, so I just have to say it maybe for my own benefit. Truth is, when the chips were down, I blew it. And you know what makes it hurt more? He warned me. He told me that would happen. Only that when the sun came, I would deny him. And you know, I was so damn cocky. I was so cocky. I thought, no, they might. I even said that. Those guys might. But not me. You know, I'm the faithful disciple. Remember, I'm the rock. Oh, I've got it together. Strong person. I was so confident. In fact, you know, I was overconfident. When it all came, oh, it was a terrible night. Well, it started out all right. They ate together at a Passover meal. Strange things happened there. Didn't follow the sequence exactly. Some other words got in there. But afterwards, the master said we'll go out and pray. And it was a long, tough day. He asked me to pray a while with him, and well, I fell asleep. But I was really tired. You know, it was a tough day. Woke me up and fell asleep again. Well, that's understandable. Then they came and arrested him. Oh, he never did trust Judas. He was in on it all the way. Then it came, they got him where he went to the courtyard. Pilate was out there, and this girl came up, and you know, she thought she recognized me, and to tell you the truth, I was scared to death. Scared of the whole thing, and it was a moment of decision, all right. I decided I'm going to save my own hide here. And I said I never heard of him. The master taught me everything I know. Guy that I've been chumming around with for a year and a half. Guy that I watched work miracles. Guy fed the 5,000. Treated me well. Told me I'd be the leader. And I denied him. Said I never knew him. Never forget it. A tough moment. And after they killed him, I was totally done in. Don't mind saying, thoughts of suicide went through my head. But I didn't do it. Something kept me going. And before long, we got this report from these women. The tomb was empty. Well, we knew they put a guard there, so no one would steal the body. They said the tomb was empty. Well, the disciple who Jesus always loved so much, he ran there like crazy. He always could run faster. He got there before I did. But he knew his place and waited. So I went in, I went and checked it out. Sure enough, he's not there. First time I saw him, you know what he said to me? I was waiting to really get it. I figured he was going to say, oh, where were you when I needed you? You know, you were so cocky, weren't you? Oh, he didn't say anything like that. He walked up to me and said, me and the whole group really, it all failed him. He walked up and said, peace be with you. Then he did a funny thing. He showed us his hands where they'd pounded the nails in his side where the spear went in. I'd heard that that's what happened. And then after he did that, he looked at us again, and you know what he said? Said it again. Peace be with you. Changed me, transformed me, took away all the guilt. You know why I can stand here and tell you that right now? Because he made me feel good about myself. Because he didn't hold a grudge against me. Because he didn't put me down. Because he said, peace be with you. You know what he said later on? He said, do you love me? He asked me 3 times. Do you love me? And each time he said, you know I do. And he said, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. You know what I got out of that? I got that good feeling again, that he was with me, he was on my side. He made a difference. He transformed me, changed me. You know, he put me back together again is what he did. I was falling apart. I was done. He put me back together. He gave me a center point here. Gave me strength. Made me feel good. Made me even feel proud. Enabled me to look at the fact that I denied him and still carry on. You know, and I intend to carry out this role of being the rock. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because he said, peace be with you. Because he said, feed the lambs and feed the sheep. Well, final things about discipleship here. First thing one would say, I suppose, is that discipleship is not just a matter of words. It's not just saying Jesus is the Lord. It's not just saying we believe certain things, but discipleship is a matter of practice, of doing. Not enough to theorize about it. We have to try to do it on a daily basis to follow the Lord. We have to prove ourselves in action. The real crisis, one might say today, in this whole area is not a crisis of faith so much. It's a crisis of whether we're believable in the way we live. That, of course, is what spread the church in the beginning. They said, look how they love one another. And it seems as though the disciples are called upon to do that. We're called upon to do that, to show it in action. And the final thing to say about Christ himself is that he is indeed the forgiving master, that he does the same thing for us that he did for Peter. Well, Peter blew it pretty badly. It's interesting to contrast the 2 disciples, Peter and Judas. Both denied the Lord, both messed up pretty badly. One bounced and one didn't. Peter was the representative disciple because he was able to come back and let the Lord's forgiveness to come in. He didn't wallow in self-pity. Well, he didn't say, woe is me. He didn't think of himself as this bad person, but he let the peace of the Lord come into him. That seems to be what we're called upon to do. Christ is the one who always forgives. 70 times 7, I think he said, or something like that, over and over again. Remarkable new chance that he always gives the disciple in life. Well, there we are. For those who are more theoretically inclined, you can get out of all of that something of what a disciple might be. Disciple, Jesus is the clear example of that. The disciples called upon to freely respond to the call of the Lord, to make some sort of total commitment. That's the ideal. We don't live up to it. The Lord's always ready to forgive us, calls upon us to carry it out again, to do so not just in words, but in action. For those who are more into story, my guess is that the story touched at some level that the analysis never came. Stories touch the imagination, the psyche, the heart in some way that says far more than person told the story could ever imagine. That seems to be one way into talking about Jesus. Tell the story of Jesus and then to let that interact with our own particular story. Well, I have saved some time for questions or comments. Some people may freeze to death before they get this chance. I think it was those who I think people should feel very free to leave and warm themselves at this point. I'm not responsible for the heat. However, we should also, does it make sense to have a couple minutes for people to leave very freely, and then those who come to stage ask questions? Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a couple minutes for people to leave very easily. I will be back here again next week at 7:30. Hopefully it will be warmer, and hopefully you will bring some friends with you. Bring your whole renewed group right here next week. Well, that moves us outside of biblical circles into, I guess, the realm of tradition. I guess that is, the tradition is that Peter died in Rome, right, especially in the first years of Nero in 64, and is buried now right underneath the Basilica of St. Peter's. And I think that the tradition is that said he was not worthy to be crucified as Jesus was, but that was done, he was crucified upside down. Is that right? Well, yes, within the biblical period, of course, we have the marvelous letters of Paul talking about that. And we have the biblical book, the Acts of the Apostles, which tell us a good deal of material along that line. When you have other things, early writing called the Didache, the end of the first century or so, which talks about that same sort of thing. You also have non-canonical gospels. You have the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of James, books like that tell particular stories about Jesus and the apostles. We also then, of course, get to the point where we have Roman records about the history of the early centuries and how they dealt with this group that they thought to be atheists. They thought they were atheists because they wouldn't worship the gods in the army and so on. So we have the Jewish historian Josephus, who wrote at the end of the first century. So some people who shed some light on those early times. Of course, you have some of the other books of the Bible, too, the letter to the Hebrews, which we think is written quite late, which also give us some idea of what went on, or how the early Christians at least interpreted who Jesus was. The stuff you get about Peter and so on is very fragmentary. Peter's own death? I think we don't know that. No, we don't know that. The other part of your question about, Jesus, part of what we will do next week is to look at the historical Jesus. Next week we'll be looking to see what we really know about him. And, the first part of your question was, what happened leading up to his death, or what his death is all about, and so on. We'll try to deal with that. But I think we simply don't know the details of Peter's life. The strong tradition is that he got to Rome, that he's the first pope in that sense, the first bishop of Rome. He was killed there in the persecution of Nero. I'm thinking 64 is the date that commonly thought of. Other questions, comments, fill-ins, yes? The question is asked, what did Christ mean when he said, let the dead bury the dead? Well, I would locate that statement in the light of this whole thing you see about Jesus. As I said, that he was in a hurry for people to make a decision. You know, if you look at the Gospels and read them, there's one way in which Jesus looks like he's always in a hurry. That, I mean, he's on the move, and things can't wait. There's a sense about Jesus of expectancy. In fact, that was in the whole culture of the times. It was what we call technically an apocalyptic sense. There was a foreboding in the culture. There was a feeling like the end times were coming soon. And Jesus talked and thought and acted, it seems, within that general climate of understanding. There wasn't much time to fool around. And I think that idea, let the dead bury the dead, is a statement, follow me now. One thing you have to understand, we're probably going to use next week too, is, I mean, the Jewish propensity for exaggeration. Jesus appears to be not to have been immune from that. You know, that's a sort of part of the culture. Part of that was because the Hebrew language didn't have a way very often of offering comparative. In other words, it was hard for them to say it's more important to follow me than to bury the dead. That's why continuously in the Bible you get these, one of the reasons you get these strong striking statements. Their language didn't give them much room for nuance the way we would say it. We'd probably say, well, you know, this is important, and it's even more important than burying the dead, and as soon as you get that task taken care of here, you know, we'll expect you to join up. Jesus didn't talk like that. No. Jesus, language forced him into strong, apodictic kind of statements. It didn't leave much room for nuance.
Father, people in my community had a difficult time accepting the fact that everyone could be disciples. They thought it was ministers to priests and teachers, and as the apostles, you know, I guess I couldn't explain the difference between the first 12 that were saved and then all of the others, of course, it seemed to be able to do that.
Very good question, and I'm glad that's true, because I'm glad so many of the renewed groups came. I feel very pleased with that, and that was the intention. And the question is asked within this renewed group that very often people were having trouble seeing that we are all called to be disciples. That disciples are the people like the priests and the nuns to be disciples, but not everyone. Well, this really necessitates more careful use of language as we find it within the scriptures themselves. As a matter of fact, there's a distinction between the 12 and between apostles and between disciples to start with. The 12 are like Peter, James, and John, those people who are the privileged witnesses. They are with Jesus from the time of his baptism all the way through to his death and resurrection. And their job is to witness to who he was. They have a privileged position. They are the founding group. They're the first bishops, so to speak. One of whom is the boss, being like we think of as a pope. So, the 12, in fact, is a technical term used in the Bible, the 12. The word apostle means those who are sent. This is a broader term. There's more than 12 apostles. We usually say that, but there isn't. There's more than 12 apostles, obviously, because we all know Paul is an apostle. So they're already up to 13, and Barnabas is an apostle, so you got more. So there's more, and there's one woman who's an apostle, too, which is important to remember. Read Romans 16 and find out about her. So that we got one woman apostle, so how many up there already? So an apostle, the Greek word apostolane, means to be sent. So the apostles are the ones who are sent out. Peter is the prototype of the apostle disciples, those who are sent out to witness. Then you got this other word, disciples, and now this is a much broader group. Luke talks about 72 disciples at one point. So there's a bunch of those running around, and not just the privileged 12. No, a lot of these people who are disciples. That is, the people who are trying to learn all this stuff from Jesus and the Father. The word disciple comes from the Latin word which means a learner. So disciples are simply learners and followers. So, when you keep that in mind from the Bible, then we're in a position to say that indeed today all of us Christians are called upon to be disciples, to be learners. In fact, you can't really get out of it. And you can't absent yourself from being a disciple. Well, because we're all learners. And that's something that maybe I didn't bring out well enough in my presentation. That means that there's a progression, an evolution, that we are in progress in terms of learning how to do this. Always, that's that faith and unbelief that we're in the midst of. We're trying to learn more about what it's all about, and we're trying to get better touch with Jesus and see how we can follow him better and so on. So we're all learners in that way, not just priests and nuns, but all the lay people. That's why we got Renew groups and the Renew program. So it's part of the learning process. The other thing that a disciple is a follower. And again, not just priests and nuns are followers of Jesus, but we all are. We're all trying to be. What is it my mentor, Uncle Carl, said? God has told him tonight. We are all Christians in order to become Christians. He said that about himself. I am a Christian in order to become one. Understand? In other words, one doesn't arrive and say, whoopee, I'm a Christian, I got it all together here. But one says, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower, a learner, as part of one's mental set, so that one is moving towards becoming a better one. I am a Christian in order to become one, says Uncle Carl. Therefore, again, from that viewpoint, that's all of us. Finally, to complete my remarks, all of the disciples are called upon to witness to what is going on. To witness to the truth of Jesus. And that, again, is something we're all called upon to do. Not everyone's called to preach or to teach or to do any particular thing. We all have our unique way of doing that. We've got our own gifts and talents and are supposed to use those to be good disciples to spread the kingdom. So the people who are thinking that way need to understand their own responsibility to be a learner, their own great opportunity to witness to the truth of Jesus Christ. We're all in it together. We're all disciples. And that's a really important point. I'm glad that you brought that up. In fact, for those people who want to pursue this, the present Pope called the church a community of disciples, and the theologian Avery Dulles has picked that up and said that's a good model of the church. What is the church? Well, not just an institution, not just a community, not just a servant, not just a sacrament, not just a herald, but church is a community of disciples. All of us. It's a neat way of thinking about ourselves because it reminds us that we're still learning, reminds us that we've got responsibility for the whole thing, reminds us that we're linked up with one another. Part of what I was trying to say about the Rauner thing in the letter I received is that discipleship spreads out. So in our communities we learn something, maybe we get nourished at Mass when we go to work and are a little kinder at work and spread the good news there. In our own way, not on a soapbox maybe, but by being a better worker, kinder person, more humane. That's the way discipleship spreads itself. Then we're getting there again, yes. Oh, very good, yes.
that Mary, this whole lecture tonight could have been given from the viewpoint of Mary, because while Peter is the representative apostle type disciple, Mary is the representative believing disciple. Mary is prototype of the whole community of disciples. She is the one that seems to symbolize and represent so well the faith response. A full, wholehearted faith response. My soul magnifies the Lord, she said. Behold, let it be done to me according to your word. Do whatever he tells you at Cana. Mary, of course, if you're going to give a full picture, also, however, will be seen as having her fault, especially in Mark's Gospel. It appears as though Mary is linked in Mark's Gospel with those who don't understand what Jesus is doing. He thinks he's God's little bit off and has gone too far, and go out there to try to get him to come back home to Nazareth and be a nice, well-behaved carpenter. Mary is, at least in Mark's Gospel, is presented as part of that problem, as that group that goes out to get him and bring him back home. Anyway, but Mary is seen, however, despite that fault, if we can call it that, over-solicitous attitude about her son, that she is put forth as a faithful disciple. And it is, again, I think, clearly in the Scriptures representative of that model. As we said in the Second Vatican Council in the Doctrine on the Church, chapter 8, the last chapter, Mary is seen, therefore, as prototype of the whole church, insofar as she receives grace from Jesus to be disciple and is called upon to carry that out. But that's, the whole thing tonight could have been done from that viewpoint. It would have given a different slant to discipleship from the way we would get it from Jesus. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a good time to stop, and thank you. We'll see you all next week.